illuminate this story about Jesus' arrest, crucifixion, and death, we have to remember that ancient Rome was a society that was obsessed with honor and shame. It was a very hierarchical society. Everybody had a place in it. And while they didn't have social mobility in the same sense that we do today, there was a lot that could happen to make you go up or down the ladder. And your rank really mattered. In fact, it was codified into law. In the year 20 BC, just a couple of decades before Jesus was born, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that determined where people could sit in public events. If you went to the Colosseum, it wasn't a first come, first serve kind of situation there. No, you could only sit in the areas in which your rank allowed. And even within that area, there were places of honor and places that were less honorable. Generally speaking, the higher you were, the more prominent, the more visible, the higher the place of honor was. The emperor was always put in one of the most visible points in the room. He was lifted up for all to see. There was an exception to this. Although generally speaking, being up was good and down was bad, there was an occasion in which Romans lifted up some folks who were not honorable. That was when they wanted to shame them, particularly in the case of criminals whom they intended to execute. And really, this isn't unique to the Romans. In every society in ancient and medieval times, when there was an effort to execute a criminal, there was a whole show, a display made around it. If you were going to behead someone, you didn't just do it in the most convenient place. They almost always started by building a stage and beheading them on the stage so that everyone would be able to see it. Hangings, which were unpleasant actions, were done in order to let the people know that those who hanged were enemies who deserved to die. And thus, even after they were killed, their bodies were often left in place for days or weeks at a time. But none of this compared to the most brutal of the Roman forms of execution, crucifixion. Because crucifixion was designed not only to inflict physical pain on people, but to inflict maximum shame, to expose them, to lift them up for all to see, so that everyone would be forced to watch the slow, agonizing death of the people whom the Romans wanted to kill. And in Jesus's case, it wasn't even ended there. Not only did they kill him as a criminal, but they mocked his central claim that he was a Messiah, putting on him a crown of thorns, making him wear a robe, even having the words "King of the Jews" hung over his head. Now, Jesus had known that this moment was coming for a long time. He told his disciples on multiple occasions that he was going to be killed, and even specifically crucified, saying to anybody who wanted to follow him would have to take up their own cross as well. But what's perhaps the most paradoxical in Jesus's rendering of the story is that when the moment comes, he doesn't describe it as a shame that he has to endure. but in the Gospel of John, at least, as an hour of glory. Let me read from John chapter 12. The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly, I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world has been driven out, and I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. He said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. In one of the most counterintuitive statements ever made, Jesus claims that this execution, which was designed specifically to bring maximum shame, would have the opposite effect. That unknowingly, the people were lifting him up to a position of glory and honor. Now, what does that mean? I think it's very important that we're clear that Jesus was not glorifying the physical suffering or the abuse that he endured. Unfortunately, people have often interpreted it this way. But if you read the story closely, Jesus himself at one point criticizes those who are beating him and attacking him. When someone strikes him, he basically says, "I didn't do anything wrong. Why did you strike me?" He's not modeling that we ought to seek after or even tolerate abuse. No, what's on display is his character, his integrity, his love, features that frankly he had always had from the moment he first appeared on this earth, but due to the specific circumstances, due to the crucifixion itself, was elevated in a way for people to see that the world had not seen before. And in this moment, when Jesus was crucified, he flipped the script on honor and shame. All of a sudden, that which seemed honorable became shameful. And that which seemed shameful was revealed as even good. So, for example, when Jesus was crucified, the soldiers mocked him. They beat him. They harmed him. They spit on him. All of this was intended to show their dominance over him, right? They were the ones who was in power. He was the one who was weak. He had tried to defy the Roman Empire, and look how he was defeated. Except that Jesus did not try to avoid this circumstance. He never pled to be set free. He never begged for mercy. In fact, he went through this willingly. And he even forgave the people who were committing these physical harms against him. And so all of a sudden, those who were trying to appear strong appeared weak and ended up being ashamed of their actions when Jesus died. Likewise, this was meant to display the authority of the system of Rome, the system of justice, the system of power. The powers and principalities were meant to say, this is how things are supposed to work. Jesus tried breaking away from the norms, and this is what happens when you do it. The problem was that the system couldn't break Jesus. He didn't stop preaching and teaching and holding on to the claims that he was making all the way to the end. And so instead of disarming Jesus, As the book of Colossians says, he disarmed the rulers and authorities and made a public example of them, triumphing over them in it. He showed that their tools of violence and threats were ultimately impotent against a person committed to truth and love. And this was designed to be a judgment. Jesus was murdered as a criminal. He was mocked. There were religious leaders who were staged to spit and to speak words of disrespect towards him. But anybody who saw Jesus on that day could not help but admire him. And instead of the judgment being on him, it turned around on the world. Once again, to read from John, Jesus said, "Now is the time for judgment on the world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." Now, ancient Rome, I said, was a society that was obsessed with honor and shame. And at times I've heard it said that this is in contrast to the way that our society works. But the truth is that we are just as interested in honor and shame. It just shows up in different sorts of ways. When we want to be recognized by certain titles, when we want people to see what we've accomplished, how well we've done, to kind of show off our wealth. When social media features places that we've traveled or gives picture-perfect views of our family, these aren't always done in prideful sin. Sometimes these are done in order to just share joy with friends and family. But there's no doubt that the system itself is built around this set of comparisons. It pressures people to try to make themselves feel higher and better and show that we are worthwhile, that we stand out, that we can make it. But as Paul says in Philippians, "Whatever gains I had, these I have come to regard as loss because of Christ. For his sake, I have suffered the loss of all things, and I regard them as rubbish, in order that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from law, but one that comes from faith in Christ." Cross exposes what things we find honorable. It reflects on us and what matters, what we prioritize, and how we live. And so as we think about Jesus at the foot of the cross, may we think about our own lives and be ready once again to lay down those things that the world tells us are valuable and important and honorable, and to exchange them for what is really good and true and pure, the love of God as modeled by Jesus Christ.